I'm Autumn Hayes, 28 years old, and I never thought I'd be caught between love and dignity until I met James Blackwell. Coming from a small Wisconsin town, I was swept off my feet by his charm and wealth. When his family ambushed me with a prenup designed to leave me with nothing, James just sat there, silent. I should have walked away then, but fate had other plans. The $33 million inheritance that unexpectedly fell into my lap changed everything, especially the looks on their faces. Money doesn't just talk, it reveals who people truly are. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself. My life before James was simple but fulfilling. I grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in Appleton, Wisconsin, where my dad worked as a high school math teacher and my mom ran a small bakery. We weren't poor, but we definitely counted our pennies. Family vacations meant camping at state parks, not flying to exotic destinations. Christmas gifts were thoughtful but never extravagant. I learned early on that happiness doesn't come with a price tag. After graduating with a degree in graphic design from the University of Wisconsin, I moved to Chicago with dreams bigger than my bank account. I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing agency where I was paid just enough to cover my rent and student loans, with a little left over for the occasional night out. My talent was recognized. I won a few regional design awards, but my paycheck didn't reflect it. Still, I love the creative freedom and the satisfaction of seeing my work displayed across the city. My path crossed with James Blackwell's on a rainy April evening at the Chicago Children's Hospital Charity Gala. I wasn't a guest. I was working, having designed the event materials and staying to make sure everything looked perfect. James stood out immediately, not just because of his tailored tuxedo or his confident stride, but because he was one of the few guests who actually acknowledged the staff as people. "That logo design is brilliant," he said, pointing to the event signage I was adjusting. "The way you incorporated the children's drawings into the hospital's emblem, it tells a story without words." I was surprised that he noticed such details. "Thank you. That was exactly what I was going for." James wasn't what I expected from someone with his background. The Blackwells were Chicago royalty, old money that had multiplied through shrewd investments and strategic marriages. Their name graced university buildings and hospital wings. But James seemed different. Genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about my creative process. He asked for my number before leaving, and I hesitated. Men like him didn't date women like me. But his smile was warm, his interest seemed genuine, and I found myself reciting my phone number despite my misgivings. Our first date was at a hole-in-the-wall pizza place, my suggestion, which surprised him, but which he embraced enthusiastically. "Best deep dish I've ever had," he declared, wiping sauce from his chin. "I love that you didn't suggest some overpriced downtown restaurant." That was James, or at least the James the first fell in love with. He was the heir to a fortune, but drove a modest car. He had an MBA from Harvard, but never condescended to anyone. He could talk about art and literature with the same passion as sports and business. Being with him was easy, natural. We fit together like we'd known each other in another life. For the first 6 months, I didn't meet his family. "They can be a lot," he would say vaguely when I asked. "I want to keep you to myself a little longer." I didn't push, content in our bubble of happiness. When I finally did meet the Blackwells at a Sunday brunch, I understood his reluctance. Eleanor Blackwell, James's mother, was all polite smiles and cold eyes. She asked about my family with the detached interest of someone inquiring about an exotic species. His father, Richard, barely acknowledged my existence, buried in his Wall Street journal. James's sister Catherine asked where I had bought my dress, her tone suggesting she already knew it wasn't from any designer worth mentioning. "They just need time," James assured me afterward. "They're protective of me after what happened with my ex." His previous girlfriend, I learned, had sold details of their relationship to a gossip magazine after they broke up. "Once they see how amazing you are, they'll warm up." I believed him because I wanted to. When we moved in together after a year of dating, Eleanor sent a housewarming gift, a set of crystal wine glasses that came with a card reading, "Perhaps these will elevate your entertaining style." I swallowed my pride and wrote a thank you note. When James proposed on our 14-month anniversary, I was ecstatic. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious. He knew my taste perfectly. "I want to build a life with you," he said, "a real life, not the artificial one my family lives in." I believed him. The warning signs were there, though. The way James would take his mother's calls in another room. How he would sometimes cancel our plans when his family needed him for something. The subtle shift in his demeanor around them, less confident, more eager to please. But love has a way of blinding you to what you don't want to see. "My parents want to host an engagement dinner for us," he said one evening, his tone carefully neutral. "Just immediate family. To celebrate." I agreed, hoping this would be a turning point. Maybe now that we were officially getting married, they would finally accept me. I spent hours choosing the perfect outfit, elegant, but not trying too hard. I practiced conversations in my head, determined to find common ground with the Blackwells. I couldn't have known that I was walking into an ambush. That behind Eleanor Blackwell's thin-lipped smile was a plan to put me firmly in my place. That the man I loved would sit by and watch it happen. The Blackwell estate sprawled across 3 acres in the most exclusive suburb of Chicago, a neo-Georgian mansion with columns that made it look more like a museum than a home. As our car crunched up the circular gravel driveway, my stomach tightened with nerves. "You look beautiful," James said, squeezing my hand. "They're going to love you." The grand entrance hall gleamed with marble and crystal, family portraits of stern-faced Blackwell ancestors lining the walls like silent judges. Eleanor greeted us wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, air-kissing my cheeks without making contact. "Autumn, that dress is interesting," she said, her gaze flicking over my carefully chosen outfit. "So bold to wear such a bright color to a family dinner." Richard Blackwell briefly looked up from his phone to shake my hand, his grip firm but impersonal. James's brother Michael smirked as he offered me a glass of champagne. "We're celebrating, after all," he said with a wink that made me uneasy. Catherine arrived last, her husband Todd in tow. "Sorry we're late," she announced without sounding sorry at all. "We were at the Prestons' yacht launch." She looked at me. "Do you know the Prestons?" "No, I suppose you wouldn't." Throughout the appetizer course, tiny portions of something unpronounceable that tasted like the ocean, conversation flowed around me rather than including me. They discussed people I didn't know, events I hadn't attended, private jokes I couldn't possibly understand. When I tried to contribute, mentioning a design project I was excited about, Eleanor cut me off. "Speaking of business," she said, "James tells us you've never asked about his trust fund." "That's refreshing." The main course wasn't any better. Michael interrogated me about my family's financial situation, disguising it as polite interest. "And your parents never invested in property? Not even a vacation home?" he asked, feigning confusion when I explained that my parents had worked hard just to pay off their modest house. "Not everyone has the same opportunities, Michael," James said, but his tone was light, almost apologetic, as if my background was something to be excused. By dessert, a delicate lemon souffle that I was too anxious to enjoy, I was mentally counting the minutes until we could leave. That's when Eleanor set down her spoon and nodded to Richard, who reached into a drawer in the sideboard and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we get too carried away with wedding plans," Eleanor said, her voice as smooth as the silk scarf draped around her neck, "there's a bit of business to attend to." The folder slid across the polished mahogany table toward me. The word prenuptial stared up at me in bold, official type. "Our family attorney has drawn this up," Richard explained, sounding bored. "Standard procedure for a Blackwell marriage. Nothing personal." But it was personal. Painfully, humiliatingly personal. I glanced at James, waiting for his surprise, his objection. There was none. His eyes were fixed on his empty dessert plate, his jaw tight. He'd known. He'd brought me here knowing this would happen. Eleanor's smile was thin as a paper cut. It's quite straightforward, dear. Just making sure you leave with nothing more than you came with if things don't work out. Her eyes glittered. Not that we're expecting that, of course. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but certain phrases stood out with terrible clarity. Waives all rights, no claim to any assets, no spousal support. It was worse than a prenup. It was a complete surrender of any financial security in the event of a divorce. I think I should have a lawyer look at this, I managed to say, my voice barely audible. Catherine laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. It's not negotiable, Autumn. It's the same agreement I signed, and Michael's wife, and every Blackwell spouse for generations. Family tradition. Of course, if you truly love James for himself, this shouldn't be a problem, Michael added, his voice dripping with false concern. I looked at James again, silently pleading for him to say something, anything. To tell his family this wasn't right. To stand up for me, for us. He finally met my eyes, and I saw conflict there, but also resignation. It's just a formality, Autumn, he said softly. It doesn't change anything between us. But it changed everything. I wanted to scream, to throw the prenup back in their smug faces, to tell them what I thought of their family tradition. Instead, I quietly closed the folder. I'll need some time to think about this, I said, summoning every ounce of dignity I possessed. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, dear. But we will need it signed before any wedding preparations can begin. The Blackwell name comes with certain responsibilities. The drive home was thick with tension. As soon as we were inside our apartment, the dam broke. You knew, I accused James, tears finally spilling. You knew they were going to ambush me like that, and you didn't warn me. I tried to talk them out of it, he defended weakly. But this is how it's always done in my family. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything? Your mother basically called me a gold digger to my face. And you just sat there. What was I supposed to do, Autumn? They're my family. And what am I, James? What am I to you if you won't even stand up for me? He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. You're the woman I love, the woman I want to marry. But you have to understand, the Blackwell fortune goes back generations. They're just protecting what's theirs. I've never asked for their money, I said quietly. I've never wanted it. I know that, he insisted. And once we're married, it won't matter. We'll be happy together, with or without their approval. But as I stared at the man I thought I knew, I wasn't so sure anymore. The James the First fell in love with wouldn't have let his family treat me like that. The James the First thought I was marrying would have stood by my side, not left me to face their contempt alone. For the first time since we'd met, I wondered if I really knew him at all. The prenup folder sat, untouched on our kitchen counter for 3 days. 3 days of stilted conversations and avoiding the elephant in the room. 3 days of me wondering if love was enough when respect seemed to be missing. I finally called my best friend Rebecca for coffee. We'd been friends since college, and she knew me better than anyone. The moment she saw my face at our favorite cafe, her smile dropped. Okay, what happened? Did you and Prince Charming have a fight? I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush, the dinner, the prenup, James's silence, my doubts. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. That's not a prenup, Autumn. That's a muzzle, she said when I finished. They want to make sure you know your place beneath them. Maybe I'm overreacting, I said, still trying to find excuses. Rich families do things differently. Rebecca shook her head firmly. Being rich doesn't give them the right to treat you like dirt. And James? He should have warned you at the very least. The fact that he didn't. She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. I love him, I said weakly. I know you do. But honey, you need to ask yourself if he loves you enough to stand up for you. Because this is just the beginning. Once you're married, It'll be something new every day, how you dress, how you talk, who you're friends with. Deep down, I knew she was right. Still, I wasn't ready to give up on James on us. The next day, I took the prenup to a lawyer, a woman named Diane Levine who specialized in family law. She read through it carefully while I sat across from her desk, twisting my engagement ring around my finger. "Ms. Hayes," she said finally, setting down the document, "I've seen a lot of prenuptial agreements in my career. This is one of the most one-sided I've ever encountered." My heart sank. What does that mean exactly? It means that in the event of a divorce, you would walk away with essentially nothing, regardless of how long you were married or what you contributed to the relationship. No alimony, no property rights, not even the right to stay in your home during separation proceedings. She leaned forward. There's also a confidentiality clause that would prevent you from speaking publicly about the Blackwell family, with significant financial penalties if breached. Is that even legal? I asked, stunned. Unfortunately, yes. Prenups have a lot of latitude. I could suggest some modifications, a sunset clause that would invalidate it after a certain number of years, provisions for support if you have children, some protection of your own career assets. But frankly, Ms. Hayes, I wouldn't sign this as it stands. I left Diane's office with a list of suggested revisions and an even heavier heart. That evening, I tried to discuss the lawyer's recommendations with James. "I'm not asking for your family's money," I explained, showing him the modest changes. "Just some basic fairness." James skimmed the paper, his expression troubled. "I don't think my parents will agree to these changes. But do you agree with them? Do you think they're reasonable?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard everything I needed to know. "It's not about what I think, Autumn. The Blackwell Trust has rules. I don't control it. You're 32 years old, James. At what point do you start making your own decisions instead of letting your family dictate your life?" The conversation spiraled from there, ending with James storming out to clear his head. He returned hours later, smelling of expensive scotch, with a peace offering of flowers, but no actual resolution. The next day, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Thinking it might be Diane with additional advice, I answered. "Is this Autumn Hayes?" a formal male voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "This is Martin Green from Green and Associates law firm. I'm calling regarding the estate of your uncle, Calvin Hayes. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks." I frowned, confused. "My Uncle Calvin? I barely knew him. He and my dad had some falling out years ago. Nevertheless, you're named in his will. Could you come to our offices at your earliest convenience?" I almost declined. With everything happening with James and the prenup, I didn't have the emotional bandwidth for what was likely some small family memento or complication. But something made me agree to an appointment the following day. Meanwhile, Eleanor Blackwell had begun calling daily, her messages growing increasingly pointed. "The caterer needs a deposit, Autumn. We can't move forward until the paperwork is settled. The Simmons are hosting an engagement party for you both next month. I do hope we'll have everything finalized by then." The pressure was mounting, and James was no help. "Just sign it, Autumn. It doesn't change how I feel about you." But it had already changed how I felt about him. My phone rang again that evening. "Rebecca, have you decided what to do?" she asked without preamble. I sighed, looking at the prenup still sitting on our counter. "I'm torn. If I don't sign, I lose James. If I do sign, I feel like I lose myself. What does your gut tell you?" "My gut is a mess," I admitted. "But tomorrow I have this weird meeting about my estranged uncle's will, so at least I have an excuse to postpone making a decision for another day." "The universe works in mysterious ways," Rebecca said. "Maybe this is the distraction you need to gain some perspective." I had no idea then just how right she was, or how dramatically that meeting would change everything. The offices of Green and Associates were located in a sleek downtown building with views of Lake Michigan. Martin Green himself was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to look straight through me. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Hayes," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. I understand you weren't close to your Uncle Calvin? No, I confirmed. I met him maybe 3 times in my life. There was some dispute between him and my father that happened before I was born. Family gatherings were awkward. Green nodded thoughtfully. Calvin mentioned that estrangement. He regretted it deeply in his final years. I didn't even know he'd passed away, I admitted, feeling a pang of guilt. 6 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. Green opened a file on his desk. Your uncle was a very private man, which is perhaps why you weren't aware of his success. After leaving Wisconsin, he settled in Silicon Valley and founded a company that developed specialized microprocessors. He held several patents that became essential to modern smartphone technology. I blinked, trying to reconcile this information with my vague memories of a quiet man who brought me model airplane kits at Christmas. The company was sold to a tech giant 5 years ago, and your uncle invested the proceeds wisely. Green adjusted his glasses. Ms. Hayes, I'll be direct. Calvin Hayes left the bulk of his estate to you. To me? But why not my father, his brother? According to Calvin, he and your father had discussed it. Your father declined any inheritance, saying their past couldn't be erased with money. But Calvin was adamant about keeping his fortune in the family, and you were his only other blood relative. I sat there, stunned. How much are we talking about? Green's expression remained professional, but I caught a flicker of what might have been amusement. After taxes and various bequests to charitable organizations, the amount transferred to you is approximately $33 million. The room seemed to spin. $33 million? Yes. The funds are currently held in a mixture of investment accounts, which I'm happy to review with you. There's also a property in California and a small collection of art. I couldn't process it. Just days ago, I had been agonizing over a prenup designed to ensure I'd never get my hands on Blackwell money, and now I was rich, independently, unquestionably wealthy. This can't be real, I whispered. Green smiled slightly. I assure you, Ms. Hayes, it's very real. We've prepared a complete portfolio for you to review, and I've taken the liberty of assembling a list of reputable financial advisors who specialize in sudden wealth management. The next few hours passed in a blur of documents, signatures, and explanations that barely penetrated my shock. By the time I left Green's office, I had a folder full of paperwork confirming my new status as a multimillionaire and appointments scheduled with a financial advisor and an accountant. I walked aimlessly through the city streets, trying to make sense of this new reality. My phone buzzed repeatedly, James, wondering where I was. I ignored it. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what this meant for us. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Blackwells had been so concerned about protecting their precious fortune from me, and now I had my own. I could walk away from James, from his controlling family, from the humiliating prenup, and be financially secure for life. But did I want to walk away? That was the question that haunted me as I finally headed home. Despite everything, I still loved James. I had believed in our future together. Would this change in my circumstances change him too? Would he finally stand up to his family now that the financial power dynamic had shifted? And more importantly, did I want to be with someone who only found his backbone when I no longer needed his money? I decided not to tell James immediately. I needed to see how things played out naturally, how he would act when the prenup deadline approached if he thought I was still the same financially vulnerable Autumn. Over the next week, I met with Margot Winters, a financial advisor recommended by Green. She helped me understand my new assets and develop a plan for managing them responsibly. The key with sudden wealth, Margot explained, is to take your time making decisions. Don't make drastic life changes immediately. Don't tell too many people until you've had time to adjust. I appreciated her advice, but couldn't help laughing internally at the drastic life changes part. My entire relationship was hanging in the balance, though Margot didn't know that. Meanwhile, Eleanor's calls grew more frequent and more insistent. The deadline she'd set for signing the prenup was approaching, and with it, a dinner at the Blackwell estate where I was expected to return the signed document. The night before this dinner, James and I had another argument about the prenup. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "It's just a piece of paper." "If it's just a piece of paper, why is it so important to your family that I sign it?" I countered. He ran his hands through his hair. "Because that's how things are done in my world, Autumn. I can't change that." "You could try," I said quietly. "You could stand with me, just once." His silence was answer enough. As I lay awake that night, James sleeping soundly beside me, I made my decision. I would go to the dinner tomorrow. I would face the Blackwells one last time. And I would finally show them, and James, exactly who Autumn Hayes really was. The following evening, I dressed with particular care for the dinner at the Blackwell estate. I chose a sleek black dress that I'd bought during a lunch break that day, my first purchase since learning about my inheritance. It wasn't ostentatious, but its quality was evident in the way it draped perfectly, in the fine fabric that felt like water against my skin. "You look different," James commented as we drove to his parents' house. "Did you do something with your hair?" I smiled. "No, I just feel different." He reached over to squeeze my hand. "I'm glad you're coming around. Once this prenup business is over, we can focus on happier things. My mother's already talking about booking the Lakeside Club for the reception." I didn't bother telling him that Eleanor had called me directly 3 times that week to discuss wedding details, operating under the assumption that I would sign her precious document. James lived in his own reality, and tonight that reality was about to collide with mine. The Blackwells were all assembled when we arrived, the scene eerily similar to the previous ambush dinner. Eleanor, perfect in pearls and cashmere. Richard, stern and distracted. Michael and Catherine with their respective spouses, all looking at me with barely concealed disdain. "Autumn, dear," Eleanor greeted me, her eyes immediately dropping to my left hand where the engagement ring glittered. "That dress is quite understated." "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied with newfound confidence. "I've come to appreciate the value of simplicity." Dinner proceeded much as before, with conversation that excluded me and subtle barbs about my background, my career, my clothes. But this time, they didn't land. I smiled through it all, no longer desperate for their approval or wounded by their rejection. When the dessert plates were cleared, Eleanor nodded to Richard, who produced a familiar folder. "I believe we have some business to conclude," she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes hard as flint. "I trust you've had enough time to review the agreement?" All eyes turned to me. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I have," I said calmly, taking a sip of water. "And I've decided not to sign it." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor recovered first, her laugh brittle. "Don't be absurd, Autumn. Of course you'll sign it. All Blackwell spouses do." "I won't be a Blackwell spouse," I clarified, "if signing the document is a condition of marrying James." Catherine scoffed. "So, it is about the money." "No," I said, looking directly at her. "It's about respect. It's about entering a marriage as equals. It's about not being treated like a potential thief rather than a future family member." James finally spoke up, his voice strained. "Autumn, please. We've discussed this. It's not personal." "That's where you're wrong, James," I said, turning to him. "It is personal. It's very personal when your family orchestrates an ambush to make me feel small, and you let them. It's personal when the prenup is so one-sided that a lawyer called it one of the worst she'd ever seen. It's personal when your mother calls me daily to pressure me, and you do nothing." Eleanor's face had gone rigid with anger. "James, control your fiancé." "He can't," I said before James could respond. "Because I'm not a possession to be controlled. I'm a person with dignity and self-respect." I removed the engagement ring and placed it gently on the table. "I won't be joining your family under these terms." James stared at the ring, then at me, shock written across his features. "You're breaking up with me? Over a prenup?" "No, James. I'm breaking up with you because when given the choice between standing up for me and pleasing your family, you consistently choose them. I deserve better than that. I stood to leave, but Eleanor's cold voice stopped me. I knew it, she hissed. I told James you were just like all the others. Gold diggers who see nothing but the Blackwell fortune. At that, I couldn't help but laugh. A genuine, full-throated laugh that seemed to startle everyone at the table. Mrs. Blackwell, I said when I'd composed myself, contrary to what you might believe, not everyone is obsessed with your family's money. I certainly never was. Easy to say when you're walking away empty-handed, Michael sneered. I picked up my purse, a calm settling over me. I'm not walking away empty-handed. I'm walking away with my self-respect intact. And, as it happens, with my own fortune. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. What do you mean? James asked, confusion evident in his voice. I hadn't planned to reveal my inheritance this way, but facing their contempt, I couldn't resist. My estranged uncle passed away 6 months ago. I just found out last week that he left me his estate. $33 million to be exact. So you see, I don't need the Blackwell money. I never did. The shock on their faces was priceless. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed without sound. Richard straightened in his chair, suddenly paying attention. Catherine and Michael exchanged glances of disbelief. James stood abruptly. Autumn, why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything? I asked genuinely. Would you have stood up to your family about the prenup if you knew I had money of my own? Because if so, that's even worse, James. It means you only respect people who have wealth. He had no answer. Eleanor, ever the strategist, quickly recovered. Well, this changes things considerably. Perhaps we've been hasty. The prenup could certainly be renegotiated to be more equitable. There's nothing to renegotiate, Mrs. Blackwell, I said firmly. I'm not marrying James. Not because of the money or the prenup, but because I've seen clearly how he behaves when it counts, and it's not someone I want to spend my life with. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. For what it's worth, I truly love James. Not his name, not his money, just him. What a shame he couldn't see that. The silence that followed me out the door was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. The weeks following my dramatic exit from the Blackwell estate were a whirlwind of change. I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with James while he was on a business trip, leaving my key and a note explaining that I thought a clean break was best. He called repeatedly, his messages evolving from confused to angry to pleading, but I held firm in my decision. I rented a furnished apartment in a secure building downtown, nothing flashy, but comfortable and distinctly mine. Following Margot's advice, I didn't immediately make any major purchases or life changes. The reality of my wealth was still sinking in, and I wanted to be thoughtful about how I used it. 3 weeks after our breakup, James showed up at my office, a bouquet of lilies in hand, my favorite flowers at least. Can we talk? He asked, his expression contrite. Privately. Against my better judgment, I agreed to coffee at a nearby cafe. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began once we were seated. You were right. I should have stood up to my family. I was a coward. Yes, you were, I agreed, seeing no point in softening the truth. He winced, but continued. I've told them that I'm making my own decisions from now on. That if they want me in their lives, they need to respect the people I care about. He reached for my hand across the table. I care about you, Autumn. I love you. Can we start over? No prenup, no family interference. I gently withdrew my hand. Your timing is interesting, James. What do you mean? I mean that you found your backbone remarkably quickly after learning about my inheritance. His face flushed. That's not fair. This isn't about your money, isn't it? Because you had plenty of opportunities to stand up for me before, and you never did. What changed if not the money? I realized I was losing you, he insisted. That woke me up. You realized you were losing me only after you found out I was wealthy, I corrected him. That's not love, James. That's opportunity. He left angry, But it wasn't the last I'd hear from the Blackwells. Word of my inheritance spread quickly through Chicago's social circles. Suddenly, people who had barely acknowledged my existence at events were finding reasons to contact me, to invite me to lunches and charity committees. I declined most, accepting only those that aligned with causes I genuinely cared about. I took a leap and left my job at the marketing agency, using some of my new funds to start my own graphic design firm. I had always had an entrepreneurial streak, but lacked the capital to take the risk. Now, I could create the kind of company I'd always wanted to work for, one that valued creativity and treated its employees with respect. My firm, Hayes Design Collective, quickly gained traction, partly due to my established reputation in the industry and partly because I could now afford to be selective about clients, choosing projects I was passionate about rather than just those that paid the bills. 2 months after the breakup, I was reviewing portfolio submissions from potential new hires when my assistant informed me that Eleanor Blackwell was in the reception area. "She doesn't have an appointment," my assistant whispered, "but she insists it's important." I considered sending her away, but decided to face her. Eleanor entered my office with the same regal bearing as always, though her smile seemed forced. "What a lovely space," she commented, looking around at the modern, airy office I'd designed. "You've done well for yourself." "Thank you," I replied coolly. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Blackwell?" She set her Hermes bag on the chair and extracted a folder, different from the prenup, but a folder nonetheless. "I thought perhaps we could start fresh. James misses you terribly." Inside was a new prenuptial agreement, less draconian than the first, but still clearly protective of Blackwell interests. "As you can see, this version acknowledges your changed circumstances. Much more equitable." I closed the folder without reading further and handed it back. "I'm not getting back together with James." The prenup was never the real problem. Eleanor's facade cracked slightly. "Don't be foolish, Autumn. You and James were good together. And now that your financial situations are more compatible, there's no reason for the stubborn pride." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "You still don't understand. This was never about money. It was about respect, about partnership, about love. James showed me he didn't truly have any of those things for me." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I see. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. James will be disappointed. James will find someone else," I said. "Preferably someone who impresses you from the start, so he's never forced to choose between his family and his partner." After she left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had faced Eleanor Blackwell as an equal and held my ground. The frightened, insecure woman who had sat at their dinner table months ago was gone. Life continued. My business flourished. I dated casually but wasn't ready for anything serious. I bought a comfortable condo in a neighborhood I loved and donated to several educational charities, establishing a scholarship for young designers from underprivileged backgrounds. 6 months after the breakup, I was at a business networking event when I literally bumped into Michael Blackwell, spilling his drink. "I'm so sorry," I began, then recognized him. "Oh, Michael." He seemed equally surprised. "Autumn, you look, well." An awkward silence fell between us. "Finally," he said, "your firm is doing impressive work." The campaign for Chicago Children's Hospital was brilliant. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised by the compliment. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "Look, I should probably tell you, the family business isn't doing so great. Dad made some bad investments and well, it's not good." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I didn't wish them ill. "James is engaged again," he added abruptly. "Some socialite from Boston." Mother approved immediately, of course. I smiled, finding that the news didn't hurt as I might have expected. "I hope they're happy." Michael studied me for a moment. "You know, I misjudged you." "We all did." "You weren't after the money." "No, I wasn't." "For what it's worth, I think my brother made a huge mistake." The new fiancé, she's exactly what you'd expect. Beautiful, connected, boring as hell. He grimaced. The prenup negotiations took 3 months. Her family's lawyers against ours. It was ugly. I couldn't help but laugh. Sounds like she'll fit right in with the Blackwells. Later that evening, scrolling through social media, I came across a photo of James with his new fiancée at a charity gala. She was indeed beautiful, with the polished look of old money and privilege. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. I could have felt bitter. I could have wished for their relationship to fail as spectacularly as ours had. Instead, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. If not for the Blackwells' prenup and James's weakness, I might have married into that family. I might have spent years trying to win their approval, dimming my own light to fit into their world. Instead, I was building something of my own, something meaningful, something that reflected my values rather than someone else's expectations. That, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. 1 year after walking away from the Blackwells, I barely recognized my life, in the best possible way. Hayes Design Collective had grown to a team of 15 talented designers, with a portfolio of clients that included major nonprofits and forward-thinking startups. I'd found a balance between leading the company and maintaining my own creative work, something I'd feared might be impossible. My relationship with money had evolved too. The initial shock of wealth had given way to a thoughtful approach to financial management. I lived comfortably but not extravagantly, focusing on experiences rather than possessions. The freedom to make choices without financial pressure was a gift I never took for granted. "You've got that look again," Rebecca observed over brunch one Sunday. "That I can't believe this is my life look." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you since you survived on ramen noodles in college." She sipped her mimosa. "You deserve all this, you know. You didn't just get lucky with an inheritance. You built something amazing with it." "I got lucky in one way," I countered. "The prenup disaster happened before I married James, not after." Rebecca raised her glass. "To dodged bullets and the wisdom to recognize them." My personal life had healed more slowly than my professional one. For months after the breakup, I'd avoided dating entirely, focusing instead on rebuilding my sense of self. When I finally did begin seeing someone, a writer named Ethan whom I met at a gallery opening, I proceeded with caution. Ethan was different from James in every way that mattered. He listened when I spoke. He was proud of my success rather than threatened by it. He had his own passions and principles, standing firmly in who he was without needing family wealth or connections to define him. "I like him," Rebecca declared after meeting him for the first time. "He looks at you like you're fascinating, not like you're an accessory." 6 months into our relationship, Ethan and I were having dinner at my place when he brought up a subject we'd danced around. "So," he said casually, serving himself more pasta, "I know about your ex. The Blackwell heir." I tensed slightly. "What about him?" "Nothing specific. Just that he exists and things ended badly." He twirled pasta around his fork. "I figured you'd tell me more when you were ready. Or not. It's your story to share." The simplicity of his approach, the respect for my boundaries without pressing or demanding, told me everything about why this relationship felt so different. His family wanted me to sign a prenup that would have left me with nothing if we divorced, I explained. When I hesitated, they treated me like I was after their money. James didn't defend me. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That must have been humiliating." "It was. And then, ironically, I inherited millions right afterward." He laughed. "The universe has quite a sense of humor." "You don't seem surprised about the inheritance part," I observed. "I Googled you before our first date," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "Standard procedure. Your firm's success is pretty public knowledge, and there were a few articles that mentioned your sudden wealth transformation. I figured if it was important for me to know the details, you'd share them." His honesty was refreshing. No games, no hidden agendas. "Does it bother you?" I asked. The money. Ethan considered this. It's not the money itself. It's more. I want to contribute equally to our relationship, and there's a financial imbalance that's just a fact. Equality isn't always about dollars, I said. It's about effort, support, respect. Those are the areas where James and I were truly unequal, not our bank accounts. He reached across the table to take my hand. That makes sense. And for the record, I'm perfectly happy to be the arm candy in this relationship. I laughed, grateful for his ability to lighten the moment without dismissing the seriousness of the conversation. The scholarship program I'd established for young designers was thriving, providing education and mentorship to talented students who might otherwise never have access to the industry. Working with these students reminded me of my own early passion for design before complications of wealth and status had entered the picture. During a portfolio review session with the scholarship recipients, one student asked me about my business philosophy. Success isn't just about talent or money, I told them. It's about knowing your worth and not compromising your values even when it would be easier to do so. As I said the words, I realized how much my experience with the Blackwells had shaped this perspective. Sometimes the most painful lessons are the most valuable. In October, I was invited to speak at a design conference held at the very same hotel where the fateful charity gala with James had taken place years earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me as I stood at the podium, sharing insights from my career journey with a room full of industry professionals. Scanning the audience during the Q&A session, I froze momentarily when I spotted Eleanor Blackwell in the back row. Our eyes met briefly before I composed myself and continued answering questions. Afterward, as attendees mingled during the reception, she approached me. "Congratulations on your success," Eleanor said, her tone carefully neutral. "Your speech was quite inspiring." "Thank you," I replied, equally measured. "I'm surprised to see you here. I'm on the board of the Arts Foundation that co-sponsors the conference." She glanced around at the people nearby, many of whom were watching our interaction with poorly disguised curiosity. "You've made quite a name for yourself." There was something different about her, a slight diminishment of the imperious bearing I remembered. Michael's comment about the family's financial troubles came to mind. "Life takes unexpected turns," I said simply. Eleanor nodded, a flash of what might have been regret crossing her features. "Indeed it does." She hesitated, then added, "James's engagement ended, by the way, 3 months ago." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" she asked, studying my face. "Yes," I said truthfully. "I don't wish unhappiness on anyone, not even the Blackwells." She seemed surprised by my answer. "Well, that's very gracious of you." "It's not about grace, Eleanor. It's about perspective. Some things matter more than pride or revenge or being right." As she walked away, I realized I felt no satisfaction in the Blackwells' struggles, no vindication in James's failed engagement. The anger and hurt that had once consumed me had faded, replaced by something more valuable, wisdom. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony with Ethan, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. "I saw you talking to an elegant older woman at the reception," he remarked. "She seemed important." That was Eleanor Blackwell, James's mother. His eyebrows shot up. "Wow, how was that?" I considered the question. "Surprisingly peaceful." I realized I've truly moved on. "Because you're over James?" "Because I'm over needing anyone's approval but my own." I leaned my head against his shoulder. "Money doesn't change who you are, it just amplifies it." The Blackwells' wealth made them more entitled, more protective of their status. My inheritance gave me freedom to be more authentically myself. Ethan kissed the top of my head. "For what it's worth, I like who you authentically are." "Very much." As we sat there together, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years, from the humiliation of that prenup dinner to the confidence I now carried with me every day. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. The true value of my inheritance wasn't the millions in my bank account. It was the knowledge that my worth wasn't determined by anyone else's assessment, not James's, not Eleanor's, not society's. That understanding was something no prenup could take away and no amount of money could buy. Have you ever had to choose between a relationship and your self-respect? What did you decide, and how did it change your life? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that walking away can sometimes be the first step towards something better. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, knowing your worth is the greatest wealth of all.